And yeah, well, I'd like to, on behalf of the whole iMoot team, just welcome everybody back for another session. So wherever you are in the world and whatever time it is, thank you for joining us. Especially like to welcome Richard Bilbrey, who's sharing with us today on It's Only PHP, a hobbyist developer's guide to customizing Moodle. Sounds exciting. So over to you, Richard.
Cheers, Shane. Thanks a lot, mate. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to knock my webcam off, just so you don't have to put up with my mug for the duration of this talk. So yeah, as Shane put it, this really, I guess, this talk is kind of my journey through just writing my first plugin, really. So we'll just start with a little bit about myself, and then I'll perhaps find out about you. Actually, my day job does not really involve Moodle in any way, shape, or form. I'm not a Moodle admin. I'm not someone who teaches and uses Moodle. I'm not a Moodle developer. I'm a paramedic by trade. Been a paramedic for about 15 years. And I am also an associate lecturer at one of the local universities. Was a full-time lecturer for a few years, a while back. Decided I missed clinical practice too much, but have been in sort of various sort of clinical educator, work-based trainer kind of roles. But as part of when I was a full-time lecturer, I did just dip into Moodle briefly because we used Blackboard at the institution I happened to be with at the time. What's that? Yeah, maybe so, Jay. And I found that inevitably, either due to user error or administration problems, students can get onto Blackboard. And the first couple of weeks was always a bit fraught. So actually, I created a Moodle site which simply duplicated the stuff that was going on inside the Blackboard course, just so students didn't get feel left out or get left behind. And that was in the sort of Moodle 1.6 days. And I didn't really have much to do with Moodle until very recently. And when I dropped in at probably like Moodle 2.4 or 2.5, and it was just like a revelation to me, really, how far it had progressed and the sort of the new functionality, and even just down to how it looked, you know, with the sort of bootstrap based themes. It was great and got me really enthused. I have had some experience with PHP and some of the other frameworks that you see there. I mean, this is just sort of PHP is probably what I'm most experienced in, but the other things really I've just sort of dabbled just because I'm interested. But I guess my kind of what kicked off my catalyst for developing a Moodle, it's all Tim Hunt's fault. I'm quite glad he's here, because in last year's iMoot, which was my first, Tim did just literally an impromptu code fix live. And I can remember sat on my decking, sun was streaming in an afternoon, and it was like a revelation to me, because lots of the things that Tim was doing I kind of recognized. You know, I knew Git, I knew a bit about PHP, although some of these sort of specifics were a bit lost because I didn't really understand Moodle that well. It really got me enthused about actually perhaps developing and being able to contribute to Moodle rather than doing what really I've done up to that point, and that's kind of just taking and using other people's work. So today I thought it might be worth just covering about how it's predominantly about how I converted an existing plugin to create a new one. But I think if you are interested in developing for Moodle, then hopefully some of these handy hints will be helpful. And for those who do have some experience with programming, you can perhaps just put me right when I go wrong. I was going to touch on Moodle's modular design, easy for you to say. I probably won't cover it in too much detail. I've just sat in on Justin Hunt's session that ran before mine, and actually his presentation covers some of the specifics of Moodle's modular design probably far better than I'm going to do. So we might just sort of transit through that one to get onto some of the other content. What is worth just exploring briefly though is Moodle's file API, because that was the way Moodle stores files was a little bit of an eye-opener for me, and that did take me just a little bit of time to get my head round. It might just, you didn't, oh, are you, Tim? Oh, I'll be grand. Oh, well, I'll definitely be in for that. Although it sounds like this one's planned. It might be helpful, Tim aside, because I kind of know a little bit about Tim, just to let me know what kind of programming experience that you guys currently have. Feel free just to type something in the chat. Okay, thanks, Catherine. Anyone who doesn't really know any of the programming languages, or are you all just secretly programming gurus? Yeah, okay, yeah, and I say, Shane, that's probably my my language of choice for most things, generally because I tend to play around with sort of website development. I use a framework called Cake PHP, which I really like. Python and Basic. Cool. Well, when I was at university, I learned how to use Turbo Pascal, which proved really, really helpful. Never picked up the language since. I wonder if it's still actually going. Okay. Anyway, let's crack on. I'll let the other comments come in. So I thought it might be fun actually to sort of start with the end, as it were, and just show you what it is I actually made. And basically, I've just made a plugin that enables you to export your book as an EPUB, which I thought might be vaguely useful. So if I just see if I can share my screen, let me just do that. Bear with me 2 seconds. Here we go. Let's just try that, see how we get on. So hopefully any second now. You had Turbo Pascal as well. Got it, Shane. I seem to have frozen. Let me just, can you guys still hear me? Let's just try that again. Yeah, cool. Sorry about this. Let me just have another go. It's the usual thing. It worked fine when I tried it earlier. Let's just drag it up there and have another go. What it has started doing annoyingly is making the window really, really small. Yeah. Just chat amongst yourselves for a second. It went far better yesterday. There we go. Sorry, I just got kicked out there while I just changed my settings again. Let's have another go. There we go. So hopefully, can you now actually see my screen? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, not yet. Oh, okay. Has it now appeared? Cool, okay. Sorry about that. That took a bit longer than I anticipated. Okay, so this is just a standard Moodle course that I've been working in. So I'm just going to take you into the appropriately named iMoot demo EPUB book that I've got here. And this is just a set of pages. Just give an example here, look, just in case you ever want to know what your heart rhythm looks like if it's not actually working properly. this one, if you ever see this on your ECG, then ask someone to defibrillate you quickly. But I'm just going to draw your attention to the administration block in the left-hand corner here, and you can see that just above the generate IMS CP plugin link, there's a new one, the create EPUB. So that's a link to my plugin. And when I click on that, it'll essentially just take the content from the book and create an EPUB. And if I just open that EPUB for you now, you can see this is Calibre, which is quite a good little app actually for managing ebooks and so forth. You can see here we've got a front cover illustration, we've got a little bit of text about what the book's about, and there's actually other metadata. If I just open it here, you can see you've got the title, which is just literally the book title. You've got the author, which is my name. Got today's date, and you've got who the publisher is and what the language is, etc. And if I just actually open the book itself, we've got the introduction page, and if I just show you that Shockable Rhythms page that you'd seen before. So the content's produced, and because I've used essentially a customized version of the Bootstrap style sheet, it looks very similar to the clean theme, which is the theme that the site itself is based on. And you can scroll through, and there are tables with color, etc. Because essentially they are just a set of organized HTML files. So that's kind of the endpoint. That was kind of what I was aiming to achieve. And actually, it seems to do it reasonably well. It's not too bad. So the question in is about how did I actually, how did I get there? So I'm just going to heaven forbid just stop file sharing. Let's hope it works slightly quicker earlier. Okay. Oh, one thing I could have shown you was it actually does generate valid. It does fit the EPUB version 3 standard. It does actually validate. Perhaps show you that later. So the 4 steps that I went through, I kind of perhaps think would be good if you're thinking about creating your own plugin. Is the first thing is you need to identify something that actually you need or want. And a part of that process really does involve actually having a look, because it turns out Moodle has an awful lot of classes and functions which probably already may well do what you want them to do. And likewise, if they don't, then there are, I'm trying to think, I think there's over 1,000 plugins, but there are an awful lot of plugins that have been kindly donated by other developers and contributed to Moodle.org, which is, yeah, there you go, thanks Tim. Incredible amount of work that people are doing. So maybe your answer is already there, which would be great. If not, you need to have an idea. And in this case, for an up-to-date version of Moodle, I couldn't really find an EPUB plugin. To be honest, I probably would have used it as a sort of exercise anyway. But I did think it was useful just to be able to export the static content. My second kind of step was actually to find a plugin that kind of does what you want already. Clearly, if you know a lot about Moodle and Moodle developing, you could just write one from scratch using a Moodle template. But if you don't, I would suggest that actually it's probably quite helpful to take an existing plugin and then kind of bend it to your will. So which is the next step. You need to actually convert the plugin to actually so it actually does what you want. And then the final steps really is lots and lots of testing. And once you've actually got a working product, then you can start having a play just to tweak it to give it some nice features. So identifying a need. So for me, electronic publications, the book itself, for the course that I had created, the static content, i.e. the content that's actually sat within books, actually are also in a physical book as well, because there's a certain level of sort of background knowledge that you need to acquire in order to be able to work as an ambulance clinician on an emergency ambulance. So that kind of stuff, it lends itself to just being delivered. Books are really, really good for organizing that. And likewise, sometimes you're out on the road with limited IT capabilities, then actually having a physical book is sometimes more reliable. And that's great. So the book's good, static content's fine. And so the EPUBs, the electronic publications format, really seem to lend itself to doing that because they also support a wide range of devices that can work offline. So you could, for example, you could have it on your smartphone, for example. This is a standard developed by the International Digital Publishing Forum, and really it's a format for representing documents. It's often just assumed that it just purely is for ebooks, but actually it isn't. You can use it for a wide range of things. It's currently on version 3, and version 3 is particularly good because it does support some of the modern web technologies like HTML5, scalable vector graphics, CSS style sheets, JavaScript, etc. And for when you're using something like a Moodle site that uses a Bootstrap-based theme, it does mean that actually some of the niceties in terms of formatting you can take advantage of. And there's also minimal work to actually do when you come to exporting the content of your books out to an EPUBs. There is an EPUB version 2, which actually the classes that the external classes I use to actually create the EPUB do support. But that needs far more work in terms of taking the each chapter's content and messing about with it, which I didn't really want to do as a kind of first project. And the EPUB 3 standard really lent itself to avoid me having to do that. So this is what the file structure of an EPUB looks like. Basically, it consists of, it must have a MIME type file, and all that does is just tell the operating system of the e-reader how that EPUB is formatted, and they're all formatted in the same way. They basically are zip files, essentially. The folder at the bottom, the meta-inf folder, has to be called meta-inf, and the only thing it really needs to contain is a single file called container.xml, and that just points to the root file of the package, and that is always the package.opf file that you can see inside the OEPBS folder. Now that folder name is just a hang-up really from EPUB 2. I put it in there just because that's what the PHP classes use to create the EPUBs, but actually it could be called anything, and you might indeed want to call it something slightly more practical like the contents folder. But this essentially then just contains HTML, which would typically be your chapters, and then any additional resources that you may have uploaded to the book, such as images, etc. The package.opf file basically is split into 4 broad sections. It has a metadata section, which just has things like the title and the subtitle and who the author is. There's a manifest, which actually just contains a list of all the files that are in that contents folder, that OEPBS folder. There's a spine, which actually lists the chapters and files and the order in which they appear. So you can have a separate table of contents if you want, but if you don't, most ebook readers will create one for you based on the spine. And then there's a guide section, and that will allow you, if you want a specific table of contents, you can. And things like your front cover image would also be specified there. And all of that is bundled up into a zip file. So essentially we've got an XML file or an OPF file. It's broadly the same kind of structure, which actually describes your package. You've actually got the content of that package, and it's all bundled up into a zip file. And so when I was thinking about actually the kind of next step about finding a plugin, anyone happen to know which plugin that actually just will bundle up your file, has an XML file that describes its content, has the content, and zips it up to export it? The glossary? Okay, yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it may do. Does it actually does it zip them when you export them? Yeah, no, me neither. But actually, we're closer to home than the glossary. In actual, the book module itself, that generate IMS CP link that was just below my create EPUB link actually does exactly that. So the IMS CP plugin, that stands for the International Management System Content Packaging plugin, easy for you to say. The IMS apparently are, and this is straight from their website, is a global non-profit member organisation. Non-profit, I seem to have written there, but I believe it's non-profit, maybe non-profit as well, who knows, which strives to enable growth and impact of learning technology in education. But essentially, this is this content packing specification just means it's just a standard. And so you can easily, in theory, export, import between different learning management systems, and in theory, any other framework that actually supports this particular style. It is only for static content, so it's not like SCORM where you could, I don't know, for example, build in an assessment and those grades would be captured. But for what I'm looking at doing in terms of taking an EPUB with its structure, this seemed to be right up my street. And if we have a quick look at just at the file structure of the IMS CP plugins, you can see that essentially it has folders. This has more than one folder. It has some subfolders. The index.html file literally is just the chapter content, the HTML from the content packaged up. And then we've got any file uploads that are associated with that chapter. And the IMS manifest.xml essentially describes the package, what it contains. And that also has a metadata section which describes the package. It has a resources section which kind of lists the resources and provides a little bit of extra data to describe them. And then there are organizations, which just really describes the structure of the resources within the package. And this is all bundled up in a zip file. So hopefully you can see there's sort of similarities between having essentially a file that kind of describes its contents, having the contents, it's all bundled up in a zip file. And that's why this became an obvious target for me when I was thinking about creating my my plugin. So the next step really was to actually get off the fence, stop, inverted commas, researching the topic, and actually get on and try and do something in code. So broadly speaking, the EPUB plugin only needs to do three things. It needs to get the content and any files from that particular book that I'm looking at. It needs to just reconfigure it slightly so that it conforms with the EPUB standards and the EPUB format. And then the last thing it needs to do, obviously, is just to be able to export that EPUB. So I'm not really going to spend too much time on Moodle plugins because actually, I don't know if anyone caught Justin Hunt's session, which ran just before this one, but actually he covers that, and his slides certainly cover how Moodle plugins are structured. But I didn't really realize, Moodle, for those who don't know, stands for Modular Object Orientated Dynamic Learning Environment. And I didn't really appreciate just how modular is modular until I started having a look in the files, particularly the activity modules that are sat within the mod folder. They are actually almost, very much the same, or there certainly are the same similar elements throughout, because that's a requirement to be able to create. Oh, there, cheers, Tim, thanks for that. I think there's quite a few different plugin types, aren't there? There is a code template for the Moodle activity module available on GitHub, but I think if you're starting completely from scratch, then actually going with an existing plugin and bending it to your will is probably a better way to go than literally starting from scratch, because even with a kind of module template, there's still quite a lot of empty gaps, which you may not really really appreciate how to fill unless you do some serious reading. There are certain files that obviously do have to be included in order to make it work. Yeah, no, definitely. Cheers. Yeah, good advice. Glad I got that bit right. So this is the basic structure of a Moodle plugin, consisting of a number of files and folders. The ones I'm not going to say go through them all right now. The key ones really that I had to give some attention to were the index.php file, just touched on that, the lib.php file, and the local lib. That's kind of really where the magic happens within that particular function. But up in the language folder, I also had to do change some of the descriptions for the strings, just so that they didn't just say generate IMSCP again. They actually said something more sensible like create an EPUB or something to that effect. But we'll come on to those shortly. The book tool is kind of almost like it's like a sort of sub version of the book module itself, and this is even more straightforward, which is brilliant. So it doesn't, for example, have to create a new database table when you set it up. It doesn't do any permanent changes to the database. It literally just creates some temporary files when it's collating any uploads that the user has submitted to the book, and they're deleted afterwards. So there's no need for you to store any particular instances. The plugin obviously is registered with the greater sort of Moodle site, so it knows it physically exists, but that's about it. So this was even better news for me, because it just seems to be more straightforward and meant that, say, I didn't have to do an awful lot of customization to get it to work. And let's say there are the three key functions where actually I played in order of sort of meddling, if you like. So there's very light touch with the index.php file. Just a couple of things I had to change with the lib.php file, but really where the magic was all happening was inside that local lib, which were the key functions I used in order to actually create the plugin. So this is the index.php file, and really there are a couple of lines at the bottom where the only things that really matter to me. That first line, the book tool export IMSCP build package function, that really is the overriding function that does everything. So that essentially will get the book, collate it, package it all up, and then return the zip file. And the only thing that that then needs to be done is that file needs to be sent to the browser. I think the true tag means that it will automatically download into the user's browser. In the lib.php file, the only thing was there was a function which just extended the Moodle's navigation settings, and that really was just to add a link into that administration block so that you can actually there's a URL and a pretty icon, which is defined by that icon variable there. And then it's just added to the navigation block using the node add at the bottom there. But as I said before, local lib's kind of where it all happens. So we have three key functions that kind of do all the magic. There's the overriding build package function, and that had a few things to do. As I said before, it basically had to create the zip file. It's got to run the functions that actually prepare and populate that zip file. And then once that's all done, it needs to clean up after itself. It's worth pointing out that in Moodle, my understanding is that you are not really allowed to meddle with the original files. You essentially create a copy, typically store them in sort of a temporary. It's not really a temporary format because it's saved in the same area as all the other files are, but they're kind of labeled in a temporary file area, if you like. And that's how they're identified in the database. And then when you finish, you just delete the copies so the originals are not meddled with and are left untouched. The second function is called by a build package function, and that's, as the name suggests, it's a prepare files function. That's exactly what it does. It collates all of the files that have been uploaded to the book. It also creates a standalone HTML file for the content of the chapter. It just adds HTML tags and head tags and body tags, etc. And then the final one is actually what actually does the conversion. It actually converts that string to the HTML file and just returns it back to the prepare files function as a string. And then the prepare file function uses one of the file API functions to actually make a physical file. Which leads us nicely onto the file API. This took me a little bit to get my head around. So files, I use the term physically, loosely, because obviously physically they're probably stored on a hard drive platter or your solid state disk, but they're located in a folder, the file dir folder, which is inside your Moodle data folder. And I had a bit of a surprise the first time I had a peek inside there, thinking I was just going to go and find my dancingbears.jpg or whatever other file that I'd just uploaded, because it wasn't there. What I saw instead was a whole set of folders consisting of 2 alphanumeric characters, and inside that folder was another folder of 2 alphanumeric characters, and then inside that folder was actually my file, but it wasn't called Dancing Bears anymore. It was labeled as a string of 40 characters, and that's because Moodle renames everything as by its secure hashing algorithm hash, which is a alphanumeric string of 40 characters. The advantage of doing this, I think there's probably some security aspects and benefits to doing this, but certainly it doesn't mean then it's extremely unlikely that you'll end up with 2 people uploading the same file with the same name. I suppose theoretically it's possible, but I don't know if anyone knows of any cases where it's ever happened. So, for example, this one I've just taken straight off the Moodle website. So we have a string there beginning with 081371CB, etc. And Moodle will basically take the first 4 characters of that string. The first 2 characters it'll create a directory, a subdirectory of file dir, and then within that folder it'll use the 3rd and 4th character strings to create another folder. In this case, you can see the first folder is called 08. The second folder is called 13, and inside that it'll actually place your file labeled as that 40 character string. And there's nothing, there are no file extensions or anything like that added to these. It is just literally that character for 40 characters. You can go back at the what if there are 8, is that 8,000 million? Each upload a million files play for 100 years. Okay, so I'm guessing that in English, Tim, that's quite unlikely then. I might just buy a lottery ticket instead. So the way you actually access files is by using the file API. So files are essentially uniquely identified by a number of things, not least the the context ID, and context is really important in Moodle. And one of the many things that context does, it's kind of where roles are defined, so you can control who can access the file, which is really useful. Also, you need a component name, because only functions within that component can actually access that particular file. The file area type, there are a range of different file area types, but typically the ones most commonly going to be used in the code I'm going to show you shortly is the temp file area, and as the name implies, that's just literally the temporary area. So that's where copies of the files are stored prior to being either zipped up or packaged up, ready to go into an EPUB. And those are then deleted afterwards. And then the file itself will have a unique item ID. And the file API has a range of functions to actually retrieve those files, to create new ones, either like a direct copy from an existing file or to create a file from a string. And then obviously when you're tidying up, you can delete those files afterwards. And actually, I do occasionally find that Moodle's documentation is hit and miss in some places, but actually the Moodle file API I found really, really good. And it's full of examples as well, which I personally find really helpful when I'm trying to work out how a function works and how I should use it appropriately. So last thing, just before I go and we'll try the dreaded screen sharing again. The PHP EPUB classes. So these are a set of classes which allow you to basically generate EPUB files on the fly. They're available on GitHub. They're created by, I think he's Danish, Asbjørn Grund. Great set of classes, and they work pretty much out of the box. The only thing, a note of caution for me, and one of the things I think in the longer term I'd want to engineer out, is that actually it relies on an external zip class. And Moodle has actually a perfectly good packager which will zip files for you. So I think to be using a completely external zip class is probably not ideal, really. But when I looked to see how easy it was to extract, it turns out that the other classes that create the EPUBs are really intertwined. They rely on this external zip class a lot, such that it would be a non-trivial matter, certainly for me, to extract them. And the way you actually create an EPUB is essentially you just you create a new instance of the class EPUB. There are a couple of variables there. By default, it always uses version EPUB version 3 because that's what plays nicely with Moodle. This particular group of classes actually does also support EPUB version 2. You have the language that the EPUB's written in, and then it also has support for languages where it's not left to right. It's actually, you can use right to left text as well. You need to set some metadata for this to work properly, including things like a unique identifier, a description, a title, the author, etc. And then to actually add files to the ebook, you can use two broad commands. They're divided into add file or add CSS file, and add large file and add large CSS file. And the only difference between using the word large is that will take an existing file, whereas the add file and add CSS file will actually take an existing string or a string that you've just created, and it will create a file from those. And I use both in the code. The other thing we need to do then, obviously, is just physically make a mention of the chapter itself, is adding that chapter to the EPUB so it knows that content exists. Once you've gone through that process, there's a finalize function which just really organizes it all, creates that package.obf file, makes sure things are labeled, collated appropriately, and then the final step is just to zip it all up. And then the function at the bottom, the send book, pretty much does what the send stored files function does in Moodle, and that's just send it to the browser where it is automatically downloaded. So the 7 steps really that I went from converting the export IMSCP plugin to my new shiny export EPUB plugin are listed here. So essentially I had to duplicate the existing plugin, rename the folder. I then had to find all the instances of the string export IMSCP and replace them with export EPUB. I had to change the name of the language file and just change some of the strings within, just so it kind of made sense that this was I was creating an EPUB. I wasn't just generating another IMSCP file. And then obviously I had to make reference to these external classes that I was going to use in the local lib file. And also obviously then I had to physically copy those PHP files into the classes folder so that they would physically exist within the plugin. And then the last step, which probably took the most work, was actually to rewrite all of the functions in local lib. So what I thought might be fun, to use the term loosely, is just to actually do that now, or at least do some of the early steps, and we'll just walk through some of the things that I looked at. Because sometimes it's easier to show than it is to describe. So I'm just going to see if I can actually share my screen again. Hopefully I'll have slightly more luck than I did last time. So if I just get these up and running. So hopefully now you guys can see in the sort of top 2/3 of the window is the actual my file directories, and then there's just a bash window in the bottom. Can you guys all see that? And girls, obviously. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So this in the top here, this is, if I just scroll back here, so this is actually my current Moodle directory, and then my Moodle data directory I talked about before. There's the file directory with all the renumbered files. There's nothing in that one. There goes one there. Okay, but actually what I'm interested in is in the mod directory, which is down here. And here is the book plugin. And within the book plugin, I say we've got these separate, book tool plugins. And you can see here that I already have the export EPUB, which is the one I demoed at the start. But this is the one that we're interested in. So this is the export IMSCP plugin. And as you can see, we've got a set of classes, a database folder, and the other ones that we're really interested in, which is the index PHP, lib PHP, and the local lib one. So all I'm going to do is just literally duplicate that plugin. So I'm just going to copy it there, and I'm just going to call it, just to make it clear that it's different, the EPUB test folder. And then down in my window, I just need to just go into that folder, and I'll just show you the content. So you can see here that it actually mimics. You've got classes and DB folders, the IMSCP style sheet, index, language, etc. And that is literally exactly the same as these ones here. There we go. That is that folder, except I'm not in that. I'm in that folder there. Okay. So the next thing I need to do is to be able to rename all of the instances. Now, in my ignorance, really, I just on the Moodle, the GitHub link that has the Moodle template, there is a command to how you do that. Apparently, it is quite a powerful command, but I just, because I'm in my complete ignorance, I just kind of used it willy-nilly. I think you're fairly safe as long as you're inside the folder, because clearly this is the aim of this is it's going to change every instance it finds of that string export IMSCP. Is going to be changed to this set of words here, the EPUB test. Doesn't matter what you change it to, as long as it matches the name of your folder and hence the name of your plugin. But I'm going to just throw caution to the wind and just hit return and see what happens. There we go. So what will happen now if I just open up index.php, for example, is you can see here that whereas before this would have said export IMSCP, it now says EPUB test. So I know that I've just literally just changed all of those strings. I've seen suggestions that people say that you probably ought to actually manually do this process the first time, just so you understand what it is you're changing. I think I did try that the very first time I did it, and all that actually happened is I missed I missed a whole load of the strings and just got really frustrated. The other thing that's probably quite important to do, when I did an early iteration of this, in kind of my ignorance really, is I tried to duplicate the whole book plugin. So I decided that I wasn't going to have a book plugin. I was going to create an ebook plugin. But actually, book and ebook are very, very close together in terms of working, and actually it just made life very, very complicated. So I'd suggest that if you're duplicating a plugin, do go for a name which is slightly different. Oh, thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, I have to say I don't use Eclipse. I just use Sublime Text, and I think actually that's got some quite powerful find and replace ones. I guess it was presented to me on an off-the-shelf, quick and easy, and I kind of just went for it, which in retrospect probably wasn't a great idea. Okay, so we have renamed all the strings, so that's great. The next thing I need to do is in my local lib folder is I need to actually make a reference to the PHP class. So this here is my local lib folder, and what I might do is I'm just going to cheat and just go and get this one. This is from the EPUB ones. So right near the top, I'm just going to make reference there. That's the reference to the classes. But obviously what I haven't done right now is I haven't actually put these external EPUB classes into this folder yet. So now I've made the reference to them, I need to actually move them in. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go into my export EPUB folder, and there is a folder which contains all of the PHP files, including that zip.php class I talked about, all packaged up. So I'm literally just going to copy that and place it in my EPUB test classes folder. Job done. So that's pretty much, now that in theory, I've done most of the stuff that I need to work. What I do need to do is a couple of things. One is I need to change the name of the language file. This doesn't change because it's called something else. So this one I just need to change to its name, which is going to be EPUB test. And inside this, you'll see there's some strings here. So these all relate to obviously the IMSCP plugin. So they're not actually that appropriate for my EPUB. So what I could probably do is just change some of these to export ebook as EPUB, and I might just put the word test in there just so I know. Instead of generate IMSCP, I might just want to say create EPUB test. No chapters found, so unable to export to EPUB. And then the last one here, I'll just be suitably modest and call it my super EPUB test plugin. Oops, if I could spell right, it would help, wouldn't it? There we go. Now what I could do, this string here, if you notice, this still says generate IMSCP, and there's reference made to that way back in the lib.php file. So that hasn't changed. I probably ought to change something like generate EPUB or something like that. But what I'd have to remember to do then is change the code which makes reference to this string. If I don't, it won't know. It will still be looking for the generate IMSCP localization string, which won't exist because I haven't created it. I'm going to leave that as it is for now, just because it won't break anything. But these are kind of nice little tweak things, if you like, that you can do subsequently. Right, so I think in theory we should be ready to go back to the website. So what I'm going to do now, this is back at the iMoot site. I'm just going to go to the home folder, and what it should do in theory is tell me that actually I've got an additional plugin that I need to install. And when I say install, all it really means is it just needs to update the Moodle database to sort of register the plugin. So you can see here, those localization strings that I changed. Here is my one, the description of the plugin, the super EPUB test plugin. We've got the directory it's located in, which is where I expect it to be. It's inside the mod book tool, and then the EPUB test, which is grand. It is a new version. I didn't really look at the version.php file, but actually most of the default settings are fine. You might want to actually create your own in terms of the date version, rather than going with what the content, the export IMSCP plugin settings are. But when you're testing on a local server, then actually it's all fine. I could probably set the maturity status to alpha or beta as well. Okay, so that's telling me that in any luck, we have installed the EPUB test plugin. So now if I go back to the website and just find a book, there's my iMoot demo EPUB book again. You can see now in the administration block that we actually have a new link to the create EPUB test plugin. Great. What it hasn't done though, if you notice, is that the icon is still exactly the same as the generate IMSCP icon. And that's not ideal. So what I can do is I can actually go back and change that. So I know that that little icon sits within the pics folder, and there it is, generate.png. So just to make my life simple is I probably won't change the name of the file. This is my new shiny, not probably done in a bit of a rush illustration. So I can just remove that one and replace it with that one. And now when I go back, by default, even if I refresh the page, it won't update. What I need to be able to do is basically purge all the caches, which is using this link at the bottom, which if you turn on the developer tools, I think that appears automatically. And there we go. Having purged the caches and refreshed, you can now see that my link is ready. However, it won't work. If I click on this now, all it'll actually do is create me an IMSCP file. And that's because I haven't actually changed any of the core functionality of this plugin, which is what all takes place inside local lib. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of the functions. As I said before, there are 3 core functions in that local lib file. There's the build package function, there's the prepare files function, and there is the chapter content function. I won't go through all of the code, but broadly speaking, somewhere around here, we need to actually create an instance of this zip file that we're going to be putting all this content in. This command here, this is that runs the function that prepares all of the files ready. So any external files that are associated with the chapter can be added here. We've then got the packer, and what it then basically does is based on the book tool, when it's prepared everything, is it just goes through each of these files, and for the purposes of the IMSCP plugin, it'll actually just captures the file path and file name, places them in an array. Once it's actually packaged the files, and it can then return the zip file. In the meantime, all these temporary files that have been created, they all need deleting. And so this is just a bit of code just to tidy that process up. In the prepare files function, as the name suggests, we need to actually iterate through each of the chapters in turn, find the files that are associated with them and make sure they're included. The other thing it also needs to do is it needs to take the content of the chapter and it calls the chapter content function just to package that up. And then what it will do is that returns a string, and that string, a file is created from that string. The final step it needs to do is it needs to create the IMS manifest file. There's a whole load of code here which does that. So it ends up with that XML file created in the correct format. And then right at the bottom here is the chapter content function. And that literally is just a wrapper. It just places some HTML code around the chapter content so that in essence it becomes a standalone HTML file, because it's no longer embedded in a Moodle page, which would typically have all this kind of external fluff added on. And that's almost exactly what my my export PHP plugin does. Broadly speaking, a very, very similar process, except of course, I'm now using the ebook. So one of the things we need to do is I need to create a new instance of class EPUB. There's some metadata that needs filling in, and I'll just touch on the this particular function when I come to the test and tweak section. But I need to add the metadata. The other thing, I'll just skip over the cover file. So here's the area files. So again, it needs to, sorry, I've skipped a bit too far. So we have that prepare files function called again. So that is doing exactly the same job as it did with the export IMSCP plugin. It needs to collate all the files that are associated with the with each chapter, as well as doing some additional files like the style sheet, for example. We go through iterate through each of the area files. Now the thing that was probably slightly different to using the EPUB, this external class, compared to the IMSCP plugin, is I actually had to identify the physical link to each file in order to add it to the ebook. So the way I did that is I used this command from the file API called get content hash. So that returned that 40-character string that my file's been renamed. And I know, because of the way Moodle works, that actually it's located from the data root inside the file DRR directory, and then it's inside a folder that's called, which is the same as the first 2 characters of that string, and inside another folder, which is basically the 3rd and 4th characters of that string, and then you've got the actual file itself. I couldn't find a way of doing this using the file API, so I essentially had to just create my own. And once I've got the reference to the actual file, then I can just use the add large file command to physically make a copy of that file and include it in the ebook. Once we've gone through the whole process, we just need to finalize the ebook and actually then send it, so it gets returned back to the user. And then, as we saw before, we need to do some tidy up, remove all those temporary files. The prepare files function, almost very, very similar to the process before. It iterates through each of the chapters. The only real key difference, we still call this chapter content function, because that still needs to package each of the chapter content up inside what is basically an HTML file. It also has to use the add chapter function to physically add a reference using the, it takes the title, it takes the file name and the content, and it will then handle the rest. We need to create the CSS file that's associated from it, and also add that to the ebook. And that's why I say I've got a custom version of Bootstrap, the Bootstrap style sheet that's just included with the clean theme. I just stripped all sorts. I still think there's far too much in there, but it just meant you end up with the same kind of font and look, which may or may not be desirable. And certainly it's one of the things we could look at is whether it's possible to actually be able to customize the style sheet you want to use. And here we have the chapter content function again, which very much does the same kind of things. It's just really encapsulating the content of each chapter within that book inside an HTML piece of HTML code. So that basically is it. It all seems quite straightforward. There are just a couple of other things. Once I'd kind of got to that process, I guess the next stage really was to actually test it lots. And I had lots and lots of pain where things broke, but actually pepper things with debugging statements is really, really helpful to see where things are going wrong. I did find actually with the developer setting in debugging turned on, the information it provides actually is really, really helpful, which is not, I've not always been the case in some of the other developing environments I've been in. So I really found those helpful in terms of tracking down problems and understanding what the issues were. So there are two things I wanted to be able to do. So one of the things from the ebook, if you remember, there was a set of metadata. I'll just go back and show you. So it's kind of important in ebooks really to be able to identify them. So the cover illustration is important, as is the information which describes the book, and there's a little description here as well. So I thought they'd be really useful to add. Now originally, the reason why I just tried duplicating the whole book plugin was because I couldn't see a way of being able to customize the settings for that particular instance of the book. You may know, if that'd be easy to show you. So if I just go and turn editing on, each book you can actually edit the settings of. So there's an edit and then settings menu here. So this is the mod underscore for PHP, which is part of all activity modules. But the issue I had was I couldn't work out a way of actually adding to this particular form within a book tool style plugin. It didn't seem to be possible. However, what it did occur to me is this description field here I could access within my code, and so I decided that what I was going to do is actually I was going to place the front cover image and then some text in that window, and actually then just extract that and make the metadata from it. So basically you insert an image into this description field, and then I've got a set of statements, and these are in separate paragraphs, and they have the same format. So you have a keyword, so in this case it's author, with a colon, and then who the author is, and same with publisher, and same with description, and same with this unique identifying ID as well. And then what I did is a couple of things I did in the code. So way back up here, sorry if you're getting seasick, it was scrolling up and down. So in the build package function, one of the things it does is it takes that description field, and actually it's called intro and on the database table, and it iterates through any of the files that it finds and checks to see if they're a JPEG or a PNG, and if they are, it'll then actually set the cover image of that ebook to that image, and the file itself gets added in. The other thing I wanted to do was actually address the metadata. So there's actually a call to a separate function, and all that does is that just passes that string from the intro, which is the description field I just showed you there before. So way down the bottom of my code, if I get there, here we go, is this pass info function. And basically what it does is it sets up some, because some of these parameters are required in order to make the EPUB classes work, I had to set some default values, and by default they're suitably unhelpful, except perhaps for the title one, which is just the name of the book. What it then does though is it iterates through that description text looking for paragraphs, and if it finds a paragraph, it explodes it by the colon, and then looks for specific strings on the left of that colon, such as author, UUID, publisher, title, description, and then inserts the string that it finds the other side of that colon, and then just cleans it, uses a function in Moodle just to clean the text so that nothing malicious gets inserted or breaks. And then it just returns that metadata, which can then be added to the ebook, which then turns out, which gets embedded in the final EPUB when it gets exported. So broadly speaking, that's kind of about it, really. My next steps. So the key things I really need to do, I think personally, I think I know enough now about EPUB version 3 that I could probably rewrite that plugin without the PHP EPUB classes. I think I'd definitely be inspired by them and probably reuse or modify the existing code. But I think actually there are definite advantages to pulling it out. So, for example, things like conforming with Moodle's coding guidelines, I'm quite sure that the EPUB.phps don't, even down to actually how the functions are labeled. You know, there's no Franken-style formatting, I don't think, used, and there'll be other rules that it's likely to break, because why should they? You know, this is a standalone PHP class. I think it also needs to be not dependent on the external zip class. We should use Moodle's existing zip function, and as I said before, just conform with Moodle guidelines on plugin creation. So really, that's it from me. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I can either just enter in the chat window, or I can just unmute everybody if you want to have a bit of a free-for-all. I think that's fine. I really just wanted to leave you with my four steps, which I went through in order to bend a plugin to my will. As long as you start simple, I think for me it's been a great way, and I certainly just kind of kept that hunger that started last year as a result of Tim's presentation. So are there any questions at all? Done chat silence. I think I'd be rambling on a bit anyway. I think the time is nearly up. Have you tinkered with? Yeah, I haven't actually, Shane. Not yet. This was my first foray into Moodle or Moodle development. You know, I kind of, after the initial enthusiasm of iMoot last year, and then I kind of got distracted because I had lots of other stuff to do and have been super busy. It kind of this is the first chance I've had to come back, and it's also a thing that kind of popped into my head. It seemed so obvious to me that actually an EPUB plugin would be really good for books, and there seemed to be. I think there's like an old version which I don't think supports current versions of Moodle. That I don't quite know what happened to that. It was, I'm trying to think what it's called off the top of my head. So I thought it'd be quite good to do. So Catherine, yeah, how long did it take to do the plugin? So all told, it'd be interesting. Actually, it probably actually, you know, it was for me it was an extracurricular activity. So it was probably evening. I reckon probably 2 or 3 weeks of you know, like a 2 or 3 hour in an evening while watching the telly playing. To kind of get it to where it is now. So I'm trying to think how many hours that might actually entail. I think it's interesting because listening to Justin's session, you know, he was saying about how important it is to read up on some of the Moodle information first, and I think that is definitely true. I think some of the mistakes I made, some of the things I got stuck on, if I had read some of the documentation up front, I may have been able to understand and may have got the concept sooner, particularly the file API, for example. But that's kind of not my style. You know, when I'm interested in tinkering, I just generally kind of like to push and break and see what happens. And although it does lead to frustration, also you get those kind of eureka moments when you feel something out. So I think if the more you understand about how Moodle is constructed and the plugin is constructed and kind of what some of the functions do, you definitely will save yourself time. On the other hand, if you don't actually know which functions if you don't know what you don't need to know, what you need to know, then actually you could spend an awful lot of time trying to find out about stuff which actually you're never going to use. So I say for me as a hobbyist, you know, I say 2 to 3 weeks of a couple of hours a day. What kind of trouble did I run into? Lots. So one of the things I found is that I would periodically add in debugging messages everywhere, and that was fine. What I'd also do is I'd occasionally just make it die. I would just stop the function there dead if I wanted to kind of grasp something. The problem is if I'd actually created some files, so say I'd copied some files and there was an entry on the database in this temp file area, I'd obviously then think, oh, great, oh, it didn't work. I might change something. I'd run the function again, and then I'd get lots of errors saying you've got a duplicate entry. And obviously I did have a duplicate entry because basically I was trying to copy the same file to the same location again. And Moodle was getting, was stopping me, actually, was giving me good advice. So it took me a little while just to realize that all I really had to do was actually use PHP MyAdmin, go into the actual database itself, and just start modifying, just removing these temporary files. That was probably the biggest issue. The last one, more of a challenge, was quite fun, was actually working out how I could capture custom metadata and insert it into the EPUB rather than just using what I knew about that particular user. That took me a little while to figure out. And I say I used Sledgehammer to crack a nut because I started by literally duplicating the whole book plugin en masse to do that, really just so that I could add some custom fields into the settings form, which was frankly just ludicrous. And I think the solution I've come up with is sort of a pragmatic solution, really. It seems to work quite well. Tim, oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, and I thank you, Tim, because ironically enough, it really was. You're to blame. This was really kind of been quite a journey to me. My first iMoot last year, and seeing that kind of stuff, and then this is the first time I've presented this year, having felt like I've done something tangible. And I'm hoping that, as you say, they just encourage you to get involved and take part. There's so many people giving their own time to contribute to Moodle. I think it's really important in terms for its longevity. I know the Moodle HQ have got plans in terms of finance roadmap, etc. But ultimately, it relies on individuals giving their time and contributing in all sorts of ways. Not just coding. Coding is just one of the ways, and probably the way that I can most helpfully contribute. I appreciate there are lots of other ways people contribute to Moodle, but I hope others do the same. Yeah, Scott, have I thought about reversing the process to create a book by importing an EPUB? Yes, I have. I think my kind of my roadmap is to tidy up this function. I think I need to get it conforming to Moodle plugins. I need to extract the classes, perhaps create some custom classes, but actually make them more Moodlish, so that all works reliably. And then I might actually have a go at submitting it. Yeah, cheers, Tim. See you later. I'm quite keen to say I have a go at submitting to Moodle.org. We'll see how that goes. That could be next year's presentation, couldn't it? But then I think once I've got that up working reliably, and that'll also give me a chance just to delve into the guidelines for EPUB 3, so I more fully understand, because there's quite a lot to it, as it turns out. But certainly basic functionality. It shouldn't be that difficult to reverse engineer it. There is an import HTML plugin, funnily enough, within the book module, which I suspect does something very similar. So what I'll probably do is start with that, and then look at reverse engineering. So I say I can take a version 3 EPUB and actually insert it into well, what would you do? I suppose you could either create a new book, or actually just insert the content into an existing book. I'd have to think about how to do that. Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. It is actually already on GitHub. If you go into, when you go back to the page, the course page for this presentation, you will see two links. One's a link to these slides, the PDF version of these slides. The other is actually a direct link to GitHub, where you can get the code now. Feel free to download it or fork it or generally meddle with it. It'd be great if people want to contribute. No worries, Andy. Thank you, mate.
Hi, Richard. It's Shane here. I just thought I'd jump in and say on behalf of the iMoot team and everyone here, actually, thank you for a great presentation. It was just great to hear your story and how you've gone, and actually very interested to see what you'll be presenting next year at iMoot.
Yeah, how I submitted a plugin to Moodle.org, maybe.
Absolutely. No, it's been great. So thank you very much for giving up your time and presenting today.
No worries. Cheers, Shane. Thanks a lot, mate.